down the ignorance thing and turn up the wisdom thing. That would be good. Good morning, happy Sabbath. I enjoyed a couple of chapels yesterday with your kids out in the school, and I just had so much fun. My goodness, it was fun. I am Stan Hudson. I am at the North Pacific Union Conference, the Seventh-day Adventist, which is Ridgefield, Washington. And just very briefly, I was studying to be a geologist back in the day at the UC Riverside campus, and spent some time there, realized that some of the things that we're talking about did not make good science sense to me. And in my moments of thinking about this, I decided to drop out of the program until I was sure what I wanted to do. I was not a Christian. I had some Christian background. It was at that time that God graciously came into my life, just poured out his grace and love on me, which I appreciate so much, and yanked me into theology. And I ended up being a pastor. But I've never lost my love for science, for geology, for earth science especially. And the more I have been around this denomination and realize its mission, the more I realize how central creation is to our beliefs. And right there in the middle of Revelation 14, as I will talk about during our sermon today. But right now, I'd like to start off with a couple of things that I think is kind of interesting about our great and loving God. What is this a picture of? Actually, is there any way we could hit these lights, the front ones, just to get a good shot, a look at these stars? They don't need to see me. They need to see what God's done. Look at that. Isn't that something? Now, let me show you something here. This is taken by the Hubble Space Telescope, not the most recent James Webb, but this is a Hubble deep space picture. Right, let's see, we have this on. Here we go. Oh, good. Whoops, come back. Okay, right there is a star. Right there is a star. Everything else you see there is a galaxy. Everything else, on average, has 200 billion stars in it. If you could see this picture as clearly as it really resolves, you would see 10,000 galaxies in just that amount. Now, you know how wide of a field that is? Well, we're looking up how much space is that. Okay, here's my pen, taking it out. I'm putting my thumb up to where all I see is the tip of the pen at arm's length. That's how much space that is at an arm's length, okay? Are you understand that? That little tiny space in the pen, in the tip of my pen, if you blow it up, is what you would see looking up in the sky. So think about that. There in the universe. There was a University of Nottingham, England, astronomer who thought, as he looked at the data, says, I don't think we know how large the universe is. I think our estimates are too small. So he did a study, and he ended up adding a 0 to the number of galaxies. And now we think we have 2 trillion galaxies. Times 200 billion stars each, on average, is 400 septillion stars. Now, what does the Bible say about that? God calls every star by name. He counts them, he knows them, and he gives each star a name, 400 septillion. I want to start that off because I start off in all of my talks and all my thinking on theology on this, is I start off with a large God, a God beyond size, a God beyond really easily understanding or getting the nature of, understanding who is God and what is he. We are entirely dependent upon what he tells us about God, about himself. Okay, anyway, so just to, if you're ever thinking you're pretty hot stuff sometime, just take a look at a picture like this. It'll humble you real quick. In fact, I'm still waiting for what I consider the better question from evolutionists to us. Usually it's if God is, a good God, why is there pain and suffering in the world? That's number one, they always say. But I wonder, if you creationists really think God created all of that, why in the world would you think he has any interest in us as little tiny specks on a tiny speck in this universe. Are you right? Am I right? It's an amazing thought. And yet, guess what? God does care, and that's the amazing thing. Okay, so we're going to talk about the flood. And why do creationists spend so much time talking about the flood? It's a real simple question based on evidence. You cannot show a lot of scientific evidence for a 6-day creation. God said, let there be light, and there was light. How do you prove that? Oh, but can you prove physically evidence for the flood of Genesis? And my goodness, yes. So the idea is if we spend a good amount of time on the flood showing that did happen, maybe people will believe, skeptical people will believe that the rest of Genesis also is historical. So let's take a look at the flood. Now, isn't it true that a lot of people almost think of the flood as a fairy tale or some sort of, sweet? In fact, don't a lot of the toys we give our kids have, Noah and the animals having a happy day and all of that kind of looks like a wonderful sea trip, kind of. Fact of the matter is the real flood was the worst event this universe has ever seen, except maybe Calvary. The worst event with billions of animals and people lost. It was a heart-rending tragedy off the scale. And we rarely talk about it in those terms, but we need to understand what it is. Incidentally, one of the most critically important things about the flood is the physical evidence of the flood. Listen to this. The physical evidence of the flood is proof that Jesus is coming back. How does that work? Because if God judged the world once, physically, for sin, then you can trust him when he's saying he's going to do it again. Am I right? Okay, incidentally, this is a small enclosed, good dynamics here. Do you laugh much here? Okay, all right. I mean, you were really friendly in the lobby, and I thought, okay, good. I'm going to get a lot of response and everything. It's okay. Respond. I love that. The earth was, and here's what caused the trigger for God to actually cause the flood. The earth also was corrupt before God. And what way was it corrupt? The earth was filled with violence. The earth. So God looked upon the earth. Indeed, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. I want you to understand that this text proves that why God targeted the animal kingdom as well as the human kingdom. All flesh, all flesh. God could have done something to target people if that's all the problem was. Fact is, the whole world, including the animal kingdom, was filled with violence. All right, so where did the ark go? Well, this is Mount Ararat in eastern Turkey, and you can see there's plenty of places where we might think the ark landed. Plenty of places, incidentally, the Bible says, literally in Hebrew, the mountains of Ararat. So somewhere in that general area. Now, anybody here remember the Cold War with Russia? Okay, some of us have some of this. You remember, I grew up in Los Angeles, and when early years were in public school, and I remember very distinctly we would have an air raid siren drill go on, and when that happened, the teacher said, get under the desk, because if the Russians drop an atomic bomb, you'll be safe there, So, yeah, it was important stuff back then. Well, the fact is, during the Cold War, Turkey and Russia also were worried about each other. And this is very close to the Russian border. And so the Turks had a tendency to not want to rile the Russians, to have a bunch of Christians or anybody else traipsing around on the mountain looking for the ark. Who knows, probably being watched by Russian snipers as they were going around. They just didn't want any incidents. They kept people off the mountain. Now, what happens whenever a government keeps anybody from doing anything? Well, yeah, and what are they up to? What is it, conspiracy theories kind of go. And it's a Muslim, country, a government, keeping Christians out. What's going? So anyway, for a while, there wasn't a whole lot of thorough searching on Mount Ararat. Now, however, we're past the Cold War. Now, however, we have satellites that take pictures. If you're reading a newspaper, they can tell you what you're reading. They're that accurate. And we are looking all over Mount Ararat, and I've looked at the most conservative, Bible-believing ministries that have an opinion on this subject, and this is what they say. We have looked everywhere. We've tracked every anecdotal story. We know exactly where supposedly something was found. We've looked, it's not there. They've come to the conclusion the ark has not been found. Now, I know you've heard stories in Adventist churches. We've heard anecdotal stories forever about people looking for the ark. Whatever you think about global warming, it is true that the glaciers are receding, so we see more of the mountain than ever. It's not there. That's okay, because I don't need the ark to believe in the flood. This is my theory, and it's a real good theory because you can't disprove it. I think Noah, I think it's a good theory. Listen, I think when Noah and his family got off of the ark, they looked around, and there was no Lowe's, there was no Home Depots, there were no Walmarts. In fact, there were no forests. I think they looked around, what are we going to use for material to build things? And I think they turned around and looked at the ark and said, well, I guess we have some material. And I think they dismantled the ark. It makes sense to me. And like I say, you can't disprove it. Okay, but if you really want to find the ark, here's a place to go, Kentucky. Have you heard about this? Anybody here been there yet? Oh, there's been a few. Okay, good for you. I tell Adventist congregations, this ought to be on your bucket list. This is really an interesting thing to go to, at least once. Be prepared to pay Disneyland prices, but it's still great. This is in northern Kentucky. There are 3 decks in this. This is the world's largest wooden structure. And it cost $100 million to build. It's built to scale. The 3 decks inside, the bottom deck has animal cages with animals in it, you know, not real animals, including dinosaur ones, incidentally. I'll talk about that later. Then the second deck has where Noah and his family lived, as well as storage, lots and lots of storage bags and jars and everything. And then the top deck was interesting to me because at the time I was setting up a museum at the Union Conference office, and they had all these science exhibits. And so the science exhibits were very interesting, and I thought, well done, not over the top. And toward the back of this boat-looking thing is actually a history of the plan of salvation, from the fall of Adam and Eve all the way to the second coming. And it's very well done. So I really recommend it if you ever get a chance to go and do it. It's very good. Northern Kentucky is on everybody's vacation list. Anyway, if you can go, good. Now, if I'm a Bible skeptic, I know that the Babylonians had a flood story that were recorded at least 400 or 500 years before Moses wrote anything down. So if I'm a skeptic, I'm saying the Hebrew story of the flood is simply a Babylonian story with a couple of twists. Well, okay, but look, the Babylonians weren't the only ones. Check this out. Egyptians, Persians, all of these ancient races had flood stories. Let's go to Europe. The Romans and Greeks actually had the date about right. Let's keep going to Africa. These are all pre-missionary contacts. Before missionaries got there, had stories of a flood. The Asians, look at all these, and you probably have heard about the Chinese characters that reveal some evidence of the flood in their ancient memories. Let's go to South Pacific. Australian, of course, would be the Aborigines. Even Hawaiians have a flood story. Let's go to the Americas and take a look. You're going to find old and, ancient as well as more modern, quote unquote, tribes. Even Eskimos have a flood story. One time I was in, I don't know if you know, the Smithsonian Institution has a collection of museums in Washington, D.C. And there's one for Native American history, people don't know about probably. But anyway, I was there, I went up to the top. On the inside, it's like a teepee going up. On the inside, there was these oldest exhibits. And a woman came by, a tour guide with a group with her. She was Native American. And she said to the people in her group, she said, "You people have a flood story, don't you?" And she said, "My people do too." And then she paused and she said, "Maybe there's something to it." Yes, in the Smithsonian. Boy, only... All of these flood stories indicate that the ancient people remember that there was such a story, wherever they went. Yes, of course, everybody. You and me, we're all cousins. You know that, right? Everybody. So, okay. So speak well of me because I'm a relative. Okay, anyway, so yes, indeed, that's all. Now, the difference is the Bible story has one very distinct difference from all the rest of the stories. The other stories are pretty much the gods were angry with man and decided to just destroy the whole world. And but somebody cleverly escaped, somehow or other escaped. Well, in the Bible story, God provides a way of safety for those interested. So God provides salvation for those who want to escape. Now, how much water is there on planet Earth? If you were to smooth the planet and remove all the mountains, fill in all the valleys, you would have 5,000 feet of water encircling the earth. There's plenty of water. The world can be engulfed with water, not a problem. And for years in Western civilization and science communities, Europe and so on, that whenever they looked around at the mountains, wherever they were, they thought they saw evidence of the latter stages of the flood. That was the understanding. That whatever the fountains of the great deep, which incidentally could mean volcanoes as well, because all it is a word that means something shooting up. So fountains of the great deep, that was a standard understanding for years. They accepted the Bible story. It made sense to them. And then something happened in Europe. And this is the age of reason. This is when the rise of secular humanism came along. And I hate to say this about Europe, which is where many of us have our descendancy from. Europe is now post-Christian in its culture. Okay, dead silence. Do you agree with that? It's pretty much post-Christian. I'll leave it to you to decide if America's on the same trail. But anyway, so the decline of Christianity opened up the door to other theories about how we got here. For instance, you had James Hutton, who's a father of modern geology. He said that he believed in what's called uniformitarianism. Almost sounds like a church. The first church of uniformitarianism. Well, uniformitarianism is simply that processes are natural. They just simply happen at the same rate we see them going. And there were no great catastrophes. There were nothing like a flood that happened and caused things. So everything, let me give you an example of what they mean. Go to the Grand Canyon, and you got the Colorado River down at the bottom and flowing through the canyon. Measure how much dirt comes out of the Colorado River in 1 year. Okay, then go out to the canyon, see how much is missing, and do the math, and that's how old the canyon is, end of story. You follow? So it's basically whatever is going on now has always gone on. That's uniformitarianism or gradualism. Incidentally, that's the same model for everything in dating ages of rocks, of tree rings, of ice sheets, you name it. Everything is on the basis of uniformitarian thinking. So that replaced catastrophism, that things happen maybe over big, quickly. That became the standard understanding, and that's pretty much still going on, except there's some cracks in that now. J. Harlan Bretz, UW, geologist. I've done this talk in Pullman, Washington, which is Washington State, right? So that's Cougars, go Cougs. This is a Husky. So I say, sorry, guys, this is a Husky, UW. Give him some credit, though. He went to Dry Falls. You ever been to Dry Falls? Dry Falls in north central Washington, kind of up by the Grand Coulee area. It is right there. Now, Dry Falls, Harlan Bretz went to Dry Falls. He looked around, he says, boy, even though there's water down here, these cliffs look like they were carved by water. This looks like Niagara Falls with the water turned off. And so he's saying something must have happened in the past that's not going on now. Oh, anti-uniformitarianism against the theory of the church or the religion, shall we say. So he presented his thinking to the geologists of America, and they said, sorry, we don't do floods. Besides, where would the water come from? Okay, so he went back and he went upstream from there, shall we say, to Missoula, Montana. Anybody here been to Missoula, Montana? If you go to Missoula, Montana, and you look at the mountains around the town, you can see shorelines up the side of the mountains. Shorelines, no question. So he went and he discovered that during the Ice Age, and I don't have a time for a lecture on Ice Age, but actually, do you know Ice Age? Scientists have no clue. Lots of quotes from scientists. Absolutely puzzled what caused the Ice Age. It would have had to have been something that involved volcanoes and the flood. We have the only answer for the Ice Age. But anyway, during the Ice Age, it was only a few hundred years, not thousands and thousands. During the Ice Age, he found out that an ice dam formed on the Clark Fork River downstream from Missoula, backed up water all around modern-day Missoula, with so much water that it equaled, like, let's say, Lake Erie in terms of capacity. A lot of water. And then, somehow, it broke through the ice dam and emptied out in a roughly that sort of way right through modern Spokane, came right down the Columbia River Gorge, carved it out further. Some water came down in the Willamette Valley. And, and he presented his evidence, including giant ripple marks, taking pictures from up above and from a plane, and presented it to the geologists. Still couldn't get them to accept it, till finally he got some of them to actually go to the dry falls and look around for themselves. And then they contacted him and said, okay, Harlan, we are now catastrophists like you. Something happened here that's not going on now. And finally, he got them to accept it. We used to live in Spokane Valley, lived on the side of a hill. Whenever we wanted to plant something, we'd be digging up these potato-sized round rocks. Now, we were nowhere near a creek or a river. That was part of the Missoula flood that came through there, and it just rounded all of these stones. So anyway, they accepted his theory. He was an old man, but he was still alive when they told him, we accept your position. And this is now called the Missoula flood, if you've ever heard of the Missoula flood. Now, you know what he said after that? He said, no, we need to go look at the Grand Canyon, because the Grand Canyon gives evidence of rapid formation. Now, speaking of catastrophes, where were you? Looking around, some of you were. In 1980, May 18, 1980, a Sunday morning. Do you remember? Were any of you around it? I do this talk in the Northwest, and I get all kinds of stories from people that can remember it. It's kind of interesting. They could hear the explosion in Vancouver, BC. They could not hear it in Vancouver, Washington. Why? Because the direction of the explosion was to the north. All right, let's talk about Vancouver. Let's talk about volcanoes for a minute, because I love volcanoes. But this was a terrible event still, because 57 people died. 8 people were in areas considered to be unsafe, but they were there with permission, mostly because they were there studying it. 49 people were killed in areas considered to be safe, because why? The eruption was much larger than they anticipated it to be. Now, so let's talk about volcanoes for a minute as a couple of types of volcanoes. Well, what is a volcano? A volcano is a bump in the ground. Something's trying to get out. It's either gas or it's lava, liquid rock, pushing up, making a bump. That's a volcano. Think of volcanoes as having 2 possible tops on them. One can have cracks in it, easy to get out, the pressure easily released, and so the lava can come up and just simply flow out those cracks. That's Hawaii. That's Hawaii going on right now, as a matter of fact. We just had another one start up in Mauna Loa. So that's interesting. So that lava just flows out nice and neatly into the ocean and makes more Hawaii. So that's good. There's other tops on volcanoes that are caps that have no cracks whatsoever. No pressure, nothing getting released. That's what Mount St. Helens was. Now that's gas, and gas was coming up, trying to get out, and starting to push the north face of Mount St. Helens out at the rate of 5 feet a day, moving it out further, bulging it out like this, till finally there was a little tremor, earth tremor, and this north side slipped down. broke free, and slipped down. When that slipped down, it released the pressure off the top. It was a cork off the bottle, and boom, out came the eruption. And you can see it in these pictures right here. So you can see right there, that's the top that used to be up here. It broke off, slid down, and when it did that, it released all of this pressure, and boom, all of this stuff happened. Tremendous power and pressure. Blew many, many square miles of trees over, as big as like this, and knocked them over, knocked the branches off, knocked the bark off, and knocked them over like giant toothpicks. I want you to understand what force that takes to blow those sideways and snap them off at their base. Unbelievable force. So what did we learn from Mount St. Helens? Well, we learned, for one thing, how to make a little Grand Canyon. This is the Toutle River down below the north slope. And take a look right here. You can see there are clearly bands of rock right there. And this all came from a single event, the eruption. And we have graded beds here. And these have now become hardened into rock layers. And of course, the water that was melted from the snow comes down and carves this out. So here we have a canyon with layers of rock. All happened rather quickly. Didn't take millions of years to make it all. So when you look at the Grand Canyon, you see layers like this that are flat like pancakes, one on top of the other. Understand that the top of each of those layers represents the top of the ground for who knows how many years. In the standard model, could be 1 million years. That was the top of the ground. Take a look at how flat those are. Do you see any canyons or any valleys or any, erosional features in between? These are just flat, one on top of the other. We don't see any little valleys. Do you understand what I mean by that? If that was the top of the ground for a while, and I mean even Kansas, it's going to have some little rivulets and so on. Instead, you see what appears to be very quick succession, no time in between those layers. They were laid down quickly, one on top of the other. Does that make sense? Okay, all right. This is universal, kind of like, yeah. So, okay, you're making sense, hooray. So this is the thing. You see this, and some of these deposits are county size, some of these are state size deposits. Where in the world is there anything like that going on today? I mean, at the base of, let's say, the Mississippi River Delta, which is the standard way of saying, well, it's river deltas maybe. Oh, how you don't get, look at how flat that is, one on top of the other. You cannot explain this other than a huge water event that just is beyond understanding. So lots and lots of this in Arizona, especially if you go down there. Take a look at this. Where is this? Monument Valley, all right, on the Utah-Arizona border. Take a look at these things, and they're really spectacular. You can clearly see that used to be the top of the ground. Am I right? That used to be the top of the ground. So where did all of this stuff go? And it's sure not down at the bottom. It's not down here. It's not even in the same zip code. Where did it go? And there's only one thing that can remove cubic miles of material far, far away, hundreds of miles away. Some people have said that this material is actually in the Mojave Desert in California. So in any case, it's sure not anywhere around there. And this is up above the Grand Canyon in terms of upstream. So incidentally, evolutionists will also agree that there have been times when water, we would call these drainage events, water draining. But I would say, I'll tell you what, if this material was still soft, it'd be much easier to drain it and erode away. Does that make sense? So we believe as the continents were rising, water drained off of the continents. Okay? All right, think about that for a little bit. Okay, so moving on. How do you bend layers like that? And evolutionists will say those are millions of years old, and they were bent after they became rock. And I would say, no, they look like they're much easier to bend when they're soft. And then they became hard at a later date. Does that make sense? So, yeah, very interesting. So, when you're doing science and you're trying to answer a question, which is typically what science is trying to do, they got a project, an idea, we want to find out about this. If you have a good question to start off with, I think you're going to have better science. Here's a good question. When you look at the crust of the earth, you know that water's been involved. What better describes what we have something done by much water over little time or little water over much time. Now, you understand that the standard view is this, but of course, those of us who believe in the Bible believe this. Also, it basically depends upon if you're willing to include catastrophism as a part of the way you interpret data. Now, okay, class, tell me what the 3 kinds of rocks are. You remember from school, don't you? Okay, what are the 3 types of rock? Igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary rock. Very good. Very good. Okay. Corporately, you get an A. Individually, probably not. All right. So let's start with sedimentary rock. Sedimentary rock is made up of sediments, pieces. A way of thinking about sedimentary rock is that it's rock that's been destroyed and resubmitted cemented into something else. Does that make sense? Teeny tiny little bits of something that are all brought together and make, think of concrete. Just add water, and that's sedimentary rock. Incidentally, coals is sedimentary. Salt is sedimentary rock. Do you know that you sprinkle sedimentary rock on your French fries? Yeah, you do. It's a good thing that it is water soluble. So it does melt in your mouth. But anyway, it is rock. Okay, so that's sedimentary rock. Igneous rock, think of something that's been ignited. It was hot and then it cooled. So rock that was hot one time and cooled, like basalt is lava. Think of volcano making basalt. And then finally, metamorphic rock is one of these 2 kinds of rocks that have been cooked into something else. Now, of these kinds of rocks, sedimentary rock is far and away the most common. And you need water to make sedimentary rock. Think of the Grand Canyon. It's almost all sedimentary rock. So this is evidence that something has happened with water over time in the crust of the earth. All right, so what is the geologist's Bible, basically the evolutionist Bible? It is a geological column of the earth. And they believe that these layers contain the inerrant record of the history of the earth. And I agree. But how you interpret it is everything, right? So anyway, this is the standard view. Please don't think I believe this. I'm just putting this up as an educational tool. All right. Okay, so for instance, these are millions of years on the left, and these are the eras and based on life. So Paleozoic early life, Mesozoic middle life, Cenozoic recent life. Take a look at this. Now, this is supposedly where life appears, or this is the earliest of the fossil records in this layer. So we would say, those of us who believe in the flood, this is about where the flood began its work, right around here. And this is why it covers up things by water and preserves them as fossils. Now, what's interesting is you immediately have most basic types of critters showing up at the lowest levels of the fossil record. Hard to explain, because if you generally think of evolution as starting off with a couple, 1 or 2 types, and then branching off, how that you already have all of these different types is a little hard to explain. And for instance, let's give an example of one of the kind of challenging ones, and that's a trilobite. Trilobites. You ever heard of trilobites? My goodness, there are trilobite nerds out there. There's societies of trilobites, collectors of every species. There's hundreds of different kinds. Trilobites are fully complex animals, immediately found at the bottom of the fossil record. They have eyes that are astounding. Some eyes are like insect eyes. Some eyes are like fish eyes. Some eyes are on poles, moving around. Fully complex animal. Now, why is that difficult to explain from evolution? They have agreed that one of the most difficult things to explain from evolution is the development of eyes. Now, how did an eye evolve from whatever? And they would say, well, maybe there was a light-sensitive patch on the skin that would help some animal orient toward light. And somehow, over the millions and millions of years, somehow that light-sensitive patch developed into a focusing separate eye and maybe a couple to give a stereo view to understand what depth of field, hard to explain, isn't it? Hard to explain. And yet the trilobite is a fully functional, complete animal at the very beginning of the fossil record. These are extinct, yes, anywhere from this big to this big, okay? So interesting. I call them water cockroaches. But anyway, yeah, it's probably not a nice thing to say. But they lived around the edge of the water, and that's why they were the first ones covered by mud as coming down from the mountains and so forth. That at the bottom of the fossil record. This is an Adventist scientist. Some of you may remember Dr. Rolfe if you've been to La Sierra. Scientists commonly refer to this abrupt transition as a Cambrian explosion. Depending upon the classification scheme used, about 30 to 40 or more animal phyla, that's major categories of critters, appear in this part of the geologic column. Cambrian explosion. In other words, boom, there's life at the fossil record. Boom. It doesn't start off with 1 or 2, and then 4 or 5, and then 100, and then 1,000, and then 1,000,000. A million right away, pretty much. Well, not 1,000,000, but hundreds of thousands. Fewer known new basic types show up above this level. This sudden appearance challenges any idea of a long, gradual evolutionary process. Now, if there's no other science quotes that you remember all day today, you must remember this one, okay? Focus. This is a guy that I consider to be the Pope of evolution. He's passed away now, but which is a whole nother story I'd love to tell you about. But anyway, here he is, Stephen Jay Gould, Harvard-trained biologist, professor of biology at Harvard. And whenever PBS or Nature or National Geographic or anybody wanted a quote about evolution, this was the guy to go to because he was funny, he was intelligent, gave very clear and good things to say, right, from their perspective. Notice what he says, the extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as a trade secret of paleontology. What's a trade secret? What's a trade secret? Is it something that you talk about publicly? Do you talk about it with your peers in your industry, in your field of study? Guys, we have a problem here. Isn't that what it is? That's a trade secret. Now, but you don't go public with it. He says there's one that's persist, going on for years and years. And what is that? The extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil records. The evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and nodes of their branches. The rest is inference, not the evidence of fossils. You've heard of missing links? He's saying missing chains. Let me give you an example. Here is the tree of life for evolution, right? And he's saying, this is what he says, we've got fossils for horses and monkeys and lemurs and all these different kinds of things right there at the end of the evolutionary trees. We just don't have anything along there. Okay, we don't have any pre-horses, pre-frogs, pre-lemurs, pre-apes. And I have a whole lecture on pre-humans. There's remarkably little evidence. Forget what you hear about the subject. The evidence is very weak for human. I've got quotes from evolutionists say we can't figure out where people came from the fossil record. Okay, so we have, notice what it says, we have data only at the tips. We only have frogs and dinosaurs. We don't have pre-dinosaurs or pre-frogs. We have no fossils. The rest is inference, not the evidence of fossils. We infer they must be out there. Incidentally, Darwin knew all about this problem in his day. He knew that someday we were going to find lots more fossils and it's going to fill in all those gaps and there'll be no questions about anything ever. It'll be all done. We are now about 120 years after Darwin in the situation. This is about an evolutionist. The knowledge of the fossil record has been greatly expanded. We now have 250,000 fossil species. Yes, we're getting more fossils. Problem is we have even fewer examples of transition than we had in Darwin's time. So in other words, the more fossils we find, the weaker evolution is looking in the fossil record. Do you understand what I mean by that? For instance, they thought, remember horse evolution? Have you ever seen a picture of supposed horse evolution? They start off with this tiny creature with multiple toes and evolves into a big creature with one toe, which is a hoof. So, they had this, then this one, then this one, then this one, then this one. They don't have that. That's not in the fossil record. And they admit it, and when you ask them about that, in fact, that earliest one's probably not a horse at all, it's something else. When you ask them about that, they say, yeah, we know, but we still put it in our books because we think it teaches a greater truth. Oh, okay. Just lacks evidence, but teaches what they want to teach. How do we even have fossils? Look at this fish, beautifully preserved. Sorry, it's in the eye of the beholder. But I think that's a beautiful fossil. How do you get detail like that? How do you preserve something? And this is a quote from an evolutionist about fish fossils in particular. The explanation of the origin of fossils by the theory of uniformity in evolution contradicts the fundamental principle of these theories, that nothing took place in the past that does not take place in the present. Look at this. No fossils are formed. He's talking, what happens to a fish when it dies? Its body gets eaten by other things, organisms small and large. And so it never gets preserved. And he says, how can that be when we got billions of fish fossils? So he admits it. He's an evolutionist, and he admits that something's happened in the past that's not going on now. All right. Let's see. Ice Age. Oh, this took me a whole day to make this slide, and I hope that you show some appreciation for it after you see it. Yeah. This is me attempting to be an animator, okay? Here we go. How did Ice Age happen? And like I say, I have got lots of quotes from evolutionists that say they have no idea what caused it, because you got to have something that's going to keep summers cold. So, and you have to have lots of precipitation in the form of snow. So here it is. Why is it, incidentally, the Ice Age is only above North America, a little bit of Siberia, goes over to just a little bit of the Western Europe, but does not continue on through most of Russia? Why was there no Ice Age there? One of the puzzlers for them about this. So, okay, you got to be around volcanoes. So this is it. Okay, these are volcanoes coming out of the ocean during a latter part of the flood or post-flood. So here's what's going on. We've got ash going over the top, over the continents, over North America, for instance, and keeps this land mass incredibly cold during even summers. Also, the hot water of the ocean heated up by the volcanoes causes more evaporation, and more of it drops on that cold land mass. And then it becomes the Ice Age. And thank you very much. That's me. Incidentally, there's really nothing else. Some event had to trigger the Ice Age. It didn't just basically happen. I'm going to go quickly through this because I was told very specifically when to quit. Fossil order. Why is it that we have, and this is creationist problem, this is a challenge. And if I'm talking to a secular group, a college-trained group, and I do not mention the problems that we have, they think I'm just a Bible-thumping know-nothing, which I might be anyway. But so let me show you what the evidence is. I used to think that the flood was like a homogeneous sort of washing machine, just churning and throwing everything together, and then when the waters subsided, everything got left in kind of a homogeneous unit. Not that way at all. We have animals in certain layers, and certain trees, and certain plants, and everything. So how did that happen? The evidence comes from things like this. Now this is Coconino sandstone from near Grand Canyon, and there is footprints in this sandstone that look like that little picture up there, some kind of 1-inch wide, sharp-toed animal, like a lizard of some kind, does not have webs, so it was lived in a drier desert kind of thing. And since it's sand, they thought that this was a dry, evolutionists think that's a dry deposit. No water involved at all. Now, Dr. Leonard Brand from Loma Linda decided he wanted to see if he can mimic the shape of the footprints, because the footprints have a mounding behind them. So how do you get that shape of footprint? So he got a tank in a laboratory, filled it with sand, got a salamander, you are my volunteer, put it in there, start walking. So it made footprints. Could not get the same footprint with just dry sand. Aha, didn't think so. Then he put a little water in, still couldn't get it. Then he put a lot of water in, really damp, still couldn't get it. Put water to where the animal was splashing as it was walking, and that did it. That gave it the right shape. So what's going on here? And you can see in the sandstone that there's at least 3 animals going in the same direction. What are they doing? They are running for their lives. They're trying to get away from rising water. Now that tells you something about the way the flood happened. The flood did not just do all this, but for a good part, especially the first half of it, came up like this. Okay? And as this was happening, animals had time to try to get to high ground. That's why in a lot of places we have animals somewhat condensed, their bones, a lot of them in one place and not near, some other place not. This is what we see happening. And also answers a question involving humans as we get on here. So I'm going to skip that. Just real quickly, on the ark itself, this is where I moved to the Bible. Just how big was the ark? What was the measurements they used? Cubits. What's a cubit? Show me a cubit. There you go. This is a cubit from here to here. Okay. And we generally think about 18 inches, about 1.5 feet. Now, here's my question for you. Was Moses recording cubits from his day or cubits from Noah's day? We generally go with the more conservative Moses, but he would have to do some kind of calculations or some sort of, I don't know what, to get, because somehow those numbers had to be preserved from earlier times. And anyway, if it's Noah's, it would make it a bit bigger boat. But anyway, okay. Incidentally, what is an ark? Because this is old King James word. An ark was what the Ten Commandments was in. So what's an ark? It's a container. It's a chest. It's a box. And God, when I'm talking to kids, I say, do you have a box at home that you put your special things in? Yeah, I do. That's what God said to Noah. Build me a box that I'm going to put my special things in. That makes sense. Incidentally, you could easily translate Ark of the Covenant as 10 Commandments box. Doesn't it lose something, though? I like Ark of the Covenant. Sounds better to me. Anyway. Okay, so it was a big box, 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 45 feet high, 1.5 million cubic feet capacity. If you use train cars to load it up, how many would it take? You ready? 522. So pretty good capacity. Now, the subject is, God says through his word that all animals came in that had the breath of life. And, of course, we believe through Ellen White these were the not confused species. We'll talk about that this afternoon when we talk about dinosaurs. But anyway, they all came in. Now, how many animals would that be? And I'm going to try to wind this up as quickly as I can, else they're going to throw me out of here, I think. But anyway, okay, can't be species level, cannot be species level, because we have 1 billion species today. How far up the classification are we talking about? Now, I went to a creation conference in that was an Adventist run, and Southern Adventist University biologist came and spoke on this subject, how many animals. And he gave, I thought, a very convincing talk that basically moved it all the way up to family in the biological thing. For instance, 2 wolves would have produced all the DNA we need for the dogs and the dingoes and the coyotes and the foxes and you name it. Today, 2 cats for all the cats we have. Brief story on cats. Driving to, there's that, that's 2? I didn't even hear the first one. Do I have permission to continue? Okay. Helen, you heard him. Okay, and I'm driving in Oregon near Coos Bay. I'm doing a series at the Coos Bay Church in the school. I'm just driving through Bandon, Oregon. Have you ever heard of Bandon, Oregon? Over on the coast. There's a petting zoo there. And I'm driving through the forest and, looking at the pretty scenery. I had some time. And petting zoo ahead. And I thought, what's this, goats or something? And I'm driving further. It's lions, tigers, and bears. Oh, okay. And then further on, largest petting zoo in North America. Okay, I'm pulling in. So anyway, when I'm in there, I get to hold a baby red fox cub, just a little baby red fox. Oh, man, cute. Possum baby, touch a bear cub and a lynx and all this. But they had one that was a big disappointment because we came into a room where they had a snow leopard, a young snow leopard. Unbelievable animal. The tail is twice as long as it should be. I mean, it's just a funny-looking, gorgeous animal. And the guy, the handler said, "I'm sorry, it's 1 year and 1 week old, and because it's over a year, I'm not allowed to let you by federal law to touch it. Sorry, we're all missed it by a week." But anyway, he had a feather ball, like you play with your cat, and he had it on a string and a stick, and he was playing with this. This cat was bouncing off the walls and everything, and I said, "That's a kitty cat. That's a little bit, just like the little kitty cats that we've always had. It's a cat." And so the DNA, what's running through that big giant cat is the same as runs through these cute little cuddly kittens that we get. It's the same family. It's the same DNA. I have a theory that you can't disprove. Here it is. Okay, think about the people coming off of the ark. Noah and his family. Noah had a grandson named Cush. Looking around, I don't see any Cushites here. What does a Cush mean in Hebrew? Does anybody know? It means black. Cushites in the Old Testament is the African race. So whenever Cushites are mentioned, that's Africans. So within 2 generations, already the DNA of Noah's family is producing a wide variety of offsprings. And I personally believe they had DNA unlike yours and mine. They lived 900 years, right? So the vitality and the strength, the biology of those people were so superior to what we are today. We are shrimps. We are nothing compared to what we used to be. We are devolved. We're not getting better. We're getting worse. So anyway, the human race had that kind of vitality for a few generations. I think it filled the races in the variety that we see today. Okay, I think the animals were the same. I think the animals coming off of the flood, out of the flood and off the ark, had a vitality that could produce what we would think of a different species today, but a variety of different kinds of animals. And I think today they can't do that now. Species are defined as only able to interbreed with themselves. But I think for a while the generations were open, just like the people today. I think animals have devolved too. Okay, that's my theory, and you cannot disprove it. But even if you had 8,000 pairs, you would still have over half of the ark left. And why was there so much room in the ark? Food and water. I'm waiting for better answers. Thank you. Kids, when I'm talking about this in school classrooms, they'll often get the answer quicker than adults overthink it. Kids say there was room for more people. That's a better answer. There was room for more people. God had made provision for many more to be saved, had they wanted to be saved. Okay, now I'm going to briefly talk about this. I'm going to close on the subject of what happened to people. What happened to people? Why don't we have lots and lots of fossils of people? The Lord said, "I will destroy man and will create the earth." He was sorry he made man. Man's thoughts were only evil continually. And what were they centered on? Violence. And if God had waited a single generation longer, Noah and his family would have been history, and Jesus could not have come because the line that he came from, right? So he waited till the very end. He says, "I will destroy man whom I've made." That word destroy means to literally wipe off something, like a plate with food on it. This is what you do. I'm going to do this to man. Gone. Where'd he go? Gone. I'm going to do this with man. Now, that's pretty much the way it happened. But I want you to think about it for a minute. Remember what the evidence of the flood action was. Waters are coming up like this. Where are people going to go? To the highest mountains. Does Ellen White say that in Patriarchs and Prophets? She sure does. Says the people went to the tops of mountains. Some of them tied their children to strong, powerful animals in the hopes that they would survive, which they didn't. When you get up to the tops of mountains and the waters are still coming, what happens? It catches you and you drown. Now, the Bible says also for 150 days after that, 150 days after the tops of the mountains are covered, the waters raged on the earth. What's going to be left? Nothing's going to be left. Hardly anything's going to be left. And when finally the water does come down, there's no more mountain material to cover and preserve and fossilize like the earlier levels, the lower levels were with other animals. So there's no opportunity to fossilize people. They're on the top. They had time to get up there. I think that is a reasonable answer to what happened. Okay, I'm just going to basically end with this. Bible says that as it was in the days of Noah, so will it be when the coming of the Son of Man is. As they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage. Think about this for a minute. And you've got family, you've got friends that you worry about, neighbors. There's going to be a day coming when the football season will be on. Everybody's watching the games. They'll be talking about the mistakes made and what's going to happen and injuries. There's going to be politics going on. The right and the left are fighting each other, and there's shifts going on, and somebody says something in Congress, and that's big news. There will be something on the morning show about some Hollywood marriage breaking up or something, all of these kinds of things. Traffic jam. And Jesus will come and catch most of the world off guard. Some of your family and friends, some of my family and friends will be caught off guard. The only reason I go around today and do this today, these kinds of things, since I am technically semi-retired, I could just do other things. Only reason I go out, only reason, is I want the maximum number of people to be ready. Now I'm looking at all of you right now. Are you going to be ready? It doesn't, don't hope so. Plan so. Make so. Of course we all hope so. I hope so. How many are going to be ready? Raise your hand if you're going to be ready. Heavenly Father, look upon us today, your kids. Help us to be ready for the greatest event this world will ever see. As John the Baptist baptized with water, Jesus is coming to baptize and cleanse this earth with fire. Heavenly Father, as we see the evidence of the flood in this world today, it's evidence that you will not let the world continue down a path of violence and destruction, and you will step in again in a judgment act. May this world be ready, I pray, at least us, that you love so much and Jesus died for. May we be ready. In Jesus' name, amen. I got things up here on the table I'd love to show you, but right now I think we need to move into church, so.